Thank you very much, Ted. I very much appreciate the opportunity to visit with you all this morning, and I can't thank the NASBA Planning Committee enough for allowing me this opportunity. I promised Billy last night that I wouldn't take more than the 10 or 15 minutes allotted me, so allow me to jump right into the topic. And what I wanted to do in the short time that we have together this morning is to really center my remarks around why I believe a separate board is the right answer. And by the way, I'm not going to flip through the slides. Those have been provided to you. You also have a backgrounder information document in your folder, and that pretty much explains the past history, but it is past history. And so I think both Billy and I want to really focus on where are we today and where do we go going forward. And as I say, what I want to do is to really concentrate my remarks around why I believe a separate board is the right answer. And let me also say, and again, it was kind of interesting last night at the reception, seeing some old friends and folks coming up and saying, hey, I'm really looking forward to your debate tomorrow with Billy. And I would say, well, and I think Billy feels the same way. We don't look at this as a debate. We look at this as trying to find the best answer to fix a problem. And I think the Blue Ribbon panel, with maybe one exception, all agreed there is a problem in accounting standard setting. And so that's not really the debate. The debate is how do you effectively and efficiently fix that problem. And that's where we just have different views. But I think I think it was David last night at his remarks said the great thing about meetings like this and the great things about the profession is that you can have differing views. And so allow me to talk about my view. And I think the way I wanted to present my remarks was really to put them in the context of my own experiences. And Barry would even admit the one person in the AICPA who's probably more passionate about this topic is me, even more so than Barry Melancon. If any of you have ever heard Barry, you know that he's awfully darn passionate. But I'm passionate not because I'm an AICPA employee, but because of my 35 years of experience in dealing with private companies. Now, I spent about 8+ years with the public firms in a traditional role as an auditor and, moved up through the cycle, but decided that was not where I wanted to play in this great profession. And so I moved over to a local CPA firm. I was the third partner. We had 5 staff. And any of you who have currently working for or have worked for a small CPA firm know that how you perform your professional practice is very different than what one does in a large CPA firm. And part of that difference is you spend a whole lot of hand-holding with your client, and you help them understand their financial statements. And you help them understand and interpret those financial results in a way that helps them be more successful. And at least in my case, the other thing that I was asked to do a lot was to go with the client, take the financial statements, sit down with the bank, sit down with the surety for my construction clients, and help them understand the financial statements. And all of those experiences for some 17 years working for a local CPA firm taught me, and I think it's very relevant being in Omaha and the home of Warren Buffett, is that cash was king. Now, I'm not saying that's not the case for public companies, but that was what users wanted to know and focus on. They wanted to focus on core operations cash flow, and everything else, with a few exceptions. Yeah, inventory, accounts receivable, those things that mattered with respect to collateral, there was some importance. But the vast majority of information in those financial statements to almost all those users, including management, was irrelevant noise. And unfortunately, a great deal of irrelevant noise. And that was 12 years ago when I left public practice. So in the years since, in my personal view, the amount of irrelevant noise in many private company financial statements has just exploded. And let me clarify one point here, because oftentimes I hear folks say, well, this is an auditing issue. No, this has absolutely nothing to do with assurance services. It has absolutely nothing to do with auditing or compilations or reviews. It has to deal with accounting. And if one thinks about the hundreds and thousands of financial statements that are out there being prepared, sometimes being prepared by that local CPA firm, the amount of cost and time that is put into trying to comply with GAAP is just an astounding number. And I think we have to ask ourselves, is that really cost beneficial if it's not providing useful, relevant information to users? Now, let me talk just a little bit about my current responsibilities, because again, it's all framing my biases as to why I believe a separate board is the right way to go. One of my responsibilities today is I have the proud pleasure of working with the TIC committee, the Technical Issues Committee. Now, some of you may not be familiar with TIC. TIC is a standing subcommittee of the private companies practice section. And what they do is they advocate on behalf of local CPA firms to all accounting standard setters. And so in my role in working with TIC, I spend a lot of time in Norwalk talking and meeting with FASB, as does TIC. And I'll tell you, if I roll the clock back some 8 years ago, it was very different. In fact, back then, we actually would have a FASB board member as well as a senior staff member come to the TIC meetings. And you could tell that they were genuinely interested in hearing about the views coming from that committee. And then things began to change. And what I would say is that if we could still live in that world, the more simpler world just 8, 10 years ago, I probably wouldn't be here today. But that's not the case, unfortunately. Probably 5 years ago, and as I get older, my sense of time kind of warps into, I can't tell whether it was 5 years ago, 7 years, or however long ago it might be, but I can remember being at a meeting of TIC with some FASB board members and staff, and at that time, we were talking about fair value, and it was kind of at the beginning of this whole fair value notion, and I remember saying to one of the FASB board members, you know, it just seems to me that you're going down a path that is going to be very subjective and also very hard to audit, not very reliable. And I can remember the FASB board member looking at me and saying, Chuck, look, you have to understand, we're being pressured by the investor community to provide more relevant information for the public markets. We can't concern ourselves with reliability. Now, as an auditor, I stepped back and I thought, holy smokes, we're in trouble. I mean, not only are the big firms going to be in trouble in trying to audit this stuff, but think about the small guy. Think about the small mom and pop trying to deal with some of this stuff in their own world. Then I also had the pleasure, and I truly mean a pleasure, of having dinner with Bob Herz one night. And Billy, in fact, Bob's a former partner of Billy's, Pricewaterhouse partner, went over to FASB as chair. Just a wonderful, wonderful gentleman. You couldn't ask for a better person, as well as somebody with more integrity relative to the profession. And I was asking Bob at dinner, you know, what's it like dealing with some of the congressional pressures? And, you know, he just went on and said, Chuck, you wouldn't believe the amount of time that we have to spend being responsive to Congress and the SEC and trying to deal with these accounting issues in the public marketplace. And so it was very clear that their role really did not allow them to spend the time with the private companies. And so when I talk about why I believe a private board is necessary, it isn't because the FASB board members weren't doing their job. I probably would have been doing the same thing and acting in the same way if I was a FASB board member. It was just the nature of the beast. And the nature of that beast is such that the capital markets and the time that's necessary for FASB to deal with those issues in that marketplace simply don't allow them the opportunity to deal with the private company issues and concerns. So we can look at solving the problem a couple ways, and there's a lot of different alternatives. One way to look at it is to say, well, let's keep FASB and let's add some private members to that, and let's hope that, you know, the third time's the charm in terms of solving this issue. Or we can look at something different, and we can look at a new board of just private company professionals trying to deal with the problem. Now, one more experience that I want to relate, and then I'll conclude, and that is another part of my responsibilities is with the private company's financial reporting committee. So after our problems with TIC, we sat down with FASB and we said, you know, it just isn't working anymore. You guys, you know, you're not coming to the TIC meetings anymore. And they said, yeah, you're right. We got these other issues. So let's create this joint venture. And I don't know how many of you are even aware that the FASB and AICPA created this joint venture called the Private Companies Financial Reporting Committee, paid for by FASB. Everybody worked on behalf of the FASB. And their whole role was to sit down and educate and help advocate to the FASB board members the issues relative to private company standards. And we thought, man, that's great. They're going to pay for this. They're going to put this group together of professionals, preparers, as well as those in public practice. Now we got the solution. 3 years later, folks, it hasn't worked very well. Yes, there's been some small disclosure differences, but again, and I don't want to sound critical of FASB, I'm not. It's just that they don't have the time to devote to those kinds of issues. So, where do I sit? I think it's obvious. I believe it's time for a different approach. A different report, a different approach that would ask FAF to create a separate board, a board that had their attention centered on one thing. So in conclusion, what I'd like to do, I'd like to ask each of you as state board representatives, understand the issue, please. Understand the past. I believe it's critical to understand the past efforts as you think about the way forward. And then ask yourself two questions. How do we not repeat the past failures? But rather, how do we move forward with the best hope for success in providing useful, relevant financial statements for private companies and their users? Your opinion matters. Your opinion matters greatly. Please give this a lot of consideration and express your views, whatever those views will be. Thank you.